Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. My name is Joe Carr. Today, we're pleased to present a preview of the upcoming Alumni and Family Weekend presentation about the impact and legacy of WDOM, the college's student-operated radio station. Our guests are Marty Moran and Tory Ryden. The three of us were all on the WDOM staff together in the early 1980s. It was a place where we learned a lot, had more than our share of fun, and began friendships that last to this day. Tory and Marty have created successful careers using, in part, those skills developed in the basement of Joseph Hall back in the day. Tory joins us from southern Maine, where she lives and works, specifically Lewiston, Maine. Hello, Tory.
Hello, Joe. Thanks for having me. Great to be with you and Marty.
This is a lot of fun, isn't it? And Marty is with us from Connecticut. Hi, Marty.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here. You guys look great.
Thanks very much. Tory is a member of the class of 1986, and she hosts Positively Maine on WGAN Radio in Portland, a great radio station in southern Maine, and she's the communication coordinator at Maine Public, which is public broadcasting and digital in Maine. She's also CEO of Tory Ryden Communications, and she's a former television news anchor and reporter at stations in Boston and in Portland. Tory, tell us a little more about Positively Maine and the other things that you're doing in your busy life.
Well, first of all, thanks, Joe. I have to say radio is my passion. I started at WDOM, and that will always hold such a special place in my heart. So I just had to get that out because really radio is king in my world. I've done radio, I've done print, I've done television, and radio will always be number one for me. So I just decided about, going on 3 years ago that I was part of, I don't want to say I was part of the problem, but being a TV news anchor and TV reporter and covering stories, and it just seemed there was a preponderance of negativity out there. And so I decided that maybe I could do something about it. And so I checked in with a local radio station. I've always kind of done some freelance work on the side. That's kind of the way we are. We're kind of, jack of all trade, and you jump in when somebody needs something. So a radio station at which I had subbed in from time to time, I asked them, hey, when are you going to let me have my own show? And after the second time I mentioned it, they said, wait a second, are you serious? And I said, yeah. So they asked me what my ideas were, and I pitched them just two different ideas, and Positively Maine really stuck. I think that for me, I really wanted to showcase the good things, the positive things, you might even say the Pollyanna things that are going on in the state of Maine. And I really love it. It is really a nice break from everything else. There's a lot of negative chatter out there, and if I can help provide just even an hour of something that is an educational and it's uplifting hour, I feel very privileged to do that. So that's why I did it.
What's an example or two of the kind of story that you tell on Positively Maine?
Well, I just rebroadcast one because it's Black History Month, and I discovered that Maine played a vital role in the Underground Railroad. And I didn't know that. And that Portland played, it was really important for runaway slaves. They would come into the port. And so there was an Abyssinia meeting hall, and there were great sympathizers in Maine. And I discovered this, and I was able to bring on some people who know a lot about that. And I loved it because I am such a geek. I love learning these things. And I just fell in love with the whole process of the role that Maine played in the Underground Railroad. That's one. I've had Senator Angus King on, Senator Susan Collins, and it's never political. I don't allow politics, but what I do allow is time to really dive deep into people's backgrounds, what they bring to the state of Maine, and for the two of them, actually, they bring to the nation. But there have been so many. The Westbrook ice disc, you remember that?
Oh,
It
sure.
was everywhere. So I had the economic development director, and clearly from Westbrook, clearly they have made out in the news globally, but also financially, because so many people turned up in the town of Westbrook. So it's current events. It's also, history, and it's music. I've had musicians on. So, it really spreads the gamut. I can't even pinpoint any one topic because it's just, you never know week to week what it's going to be.
Well, I think most
But
people
I'm
will,
just so lucky.
most people will agree there's nothing wrong with some positive news from time to time.
Yeah.
So that all does really sound great, especially in your capable hands. And Marty is a professional voiceover artist, and this is a job he's been doing for about 20 years now. After working in radio on his native Cape Cod and at stations in Boston and Hartford, he ventured out into voice work. He's performed on hundreds of commercial spots with radio clients, including Lego, Uber, and Hasbro. And on the television side, his clients, and by the way, sometimes this is even on camera, include CarMax, the Connecticut Office of Tourism, and Laithwaite's Wine. Let's listen to one example. Here's a spot Marty recorded for Lego.
The new cool Lego Technic Race. Build your racetrack and get ready for action. Feel the thrill of the competition. Get the maximum power and go! Who has the most power to win? What a close race! The new cool pullback vehicles from Lego Technic.
By the way, I'd like to mention that Marty and I are classmates. So we first met back in about 1979 sometime, probably, when we first arrived here on campus. Been friends for a long time, and it's great to catch up with Marty in this context for sure. And we're really looking forward to having both Tory and Marty here this coming weekend. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But Marty, how does this work? So you have the studio right there in your home, and that's where you do most of your work, right?
Currently, yes. When I first started doing voiceover work, though, the business was a little bit different, where you would actually have to go and record at other studios. So I'd be off to New York City or Boston or northern New Jersey. Nobody had a home studio when I first started. But then as the technology advanced and computers got better, it became much more affordable to build your own studio. And so the business has changed, where if you're going to be a voiceover artist on a full-time basis, you pretty much have to have a studio of your own. And it also has to be, very professional quality.
So clients talk you through the recording of a spot? Is that how that works? Or agencies, as the case may be, and you have a conversation and they say a little more of this, a little less of that, and that's sort of the format?
Yeah, so if I'm recording it at home, at my home studio, there's a technology I use. It's an application called Source Connect, and it's like a really good quality Skype. So I can be here, and then I can be recorded at any location anywhere else in the world. And yes, they listen in real time and talk to me in real time, and they're also recording me on their end too. I also record on my end just to make sure that there are no glitches or whatever. But yeah, I've done it for people all over the place. So just last week I did a project for San Pellegrino, and they're all in Milan, Italy, and I'm doing it here, from the big old state of Connecticut, But yes, that's how it works. There's also a lot of work that I do where the clients, frankly, don't want to be involved. They especially clients that I've gotten repeat work with, a lot of corporate training, compliance videos, anti-hostile workplace environment videos, stuff like that. I've sort of gotten very used to the way that they like that stuff and understand the jargon and the rules involved. So yeah, so it's a mix, actually. Some want to be there listening in and directing, some want nothing to do with it.
So your work, Marty, is all about performance and using your voice. What do you do in terms of training for your voice? These are muscles. You have to keep them in shape. You do various kinds of voices. Do you practice the deep and the lively and the different sorts of characteristics that you bring to various kinds of your work?
When I was first starting, I did do a lot of different kinds of practicing. I would actually listen to other voiceover artists' demo tapes, and I would try to emulate them, not imitate them, but emulate the style in that way. I think that to keep your voice strong and healthy now, for me, is just by using it, not abusing it. I also sing. I've played in a band ever since, I don't know how long, like 30 years. And even if I'm driving to a voiceover session, or if I'm driving to an audition, I'll listen to Beach Boys music and sing the different parts, because they go from way low to way high, and it just sort of gives your voice a really nice workout, so you're all warmed up and all stretched out by the time you get there. So, but everybody has their own things. Some people, believe in, I got to drink tea with lemon and honey and, whatever. So there's all kinds of things like that.
You want to give us
I don't do that.
You want to give us a little Help Me Rhonda or something right now? Would that be?
Yeah, right. Let me get my guitar.
Okay, that sounds good. But I'd like to mention one thing before I forget it. Marty also generously donates his time and talent to his alma mater. We lean on him pretty often to use his voice for video projects in particular that we're working on here at PC, and he's always very nice and happy to chip in and gives us very high quality voice tracks for these projects. And another cool thing is that Marty's wife, Susan Sachs, does exactly the same kind of work. So you have
you got
right
a twofer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Susan did a PC project
right.
a few weeks ago, something like that. Yep.
And she's also
so we both do the same work. We actually met in New York City. We were both going to meet. It was an agent meet and greet. This is in 1999, and I didn't know Susan, but I recognized her voice because she worked in Connecticut radio at a station down in New Haven. So that's how we met.
love at first listen, right? As opposed
That's
to first
right.
sight, something like that.
That's what I tell her. It's love at
Perfect.
first listen. That's right.
So let's go back to our WDOM days, and I'd like to ask you what you remember about each other. Let's start with you, Tory. What do you remember about Marty? So he was the boss. He was the general manager when we were seniors and you were a freshman.
Yeah, I really looked up to you guys. I mean, I really didn't know I was really so green. I was so lucky to step in and be able to get some airtime. But Marty, I remember you had the best head of hair. What happened?
Oh, I know. Who needs hair?
Who needs it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things. I mean, I just kind of got tired of the way that it looked and just started shaving it off,
Yeah.
So
well, you know what? Who needs
happened.
it? Yeah, you don't
That's
have to
right.
spend much time on it. No, I think that when I walked in, I can remember thinking, oh my gosh, these guys really know what they're doing. And because you were in control of the entire newsroom, the whole station, not just the newsroom, but the whole station. And Marty, I can remember the first day I walked in and you were sitting there and, you were kind of welcoming some of us in who were coming in and you were giving us the lay of the land and you were totally in control. And just seemed so cool, and you just had it all going on. I mean, you didn't seem like you were a student because you were just way more mature than the rest of us. And then Joe, I remember you were always kind of rushing here and there because you were always doing the sporting events. So you always had someplace else to go. So you'd come in and you'd be out. And you were always on the radio, and just again. Seemed way older than I have to say. But again,
And
that's gotten a freshman.
That's gotten worse in the intervening years, by the way. So you're probably right. And Marty, what do you remember about Tory, Marty?
So I remember Tory and her classmates coming in, and one of the things that I always liked was the energy and positivity of the new people coming in. And, contrary to what you might think, Tory, we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, we were just doing the best that we knew we were doing the best that we could. And we were excited to do what we did, and we believed in what we were doing, certainly. But we also wanted to share it with everybody too, so, and it was a total learn as you do, a hands-on experience. But I remember Tory basically looks the same as she did then, and Tory
hardly.
Tory was always she's perfect for the positivity show that she does, because she was a very positive presence at the station during that time, and that's what the station thrived on, that positive energy, people that were pursuing their own individual interests, but which all dovetailed into what the station was trying to do. So if you're into news, there was something there for you. If you're into sports, something there for you. If you're into classical music, you could do a show in that. If you're into public affairs, we had that. There was something then for everybody.
I think I did every single one of those things that you just mentioned. I mean, that's the thing that was so great about WDOM. I didn't know anything about classical music, but there I was with a classical music show.
Sure.
Suddenly.
And you know what? I knew nothing about classical music either, but I learned, one of the things that I learned from it was the pronunciation of a lot of the artists, or I'm sorry,
Yes.
the composers. And I use that to this day. The Cleveland Orchestra is one of my clients, and it's kind of fun to actually, oh, I know who this guy is, So yeah, it's interesting.
And I sometimes listen and I hear Alec Baldwin on public radio, and he is introducing the fifth movement of Rachmaninoff. And I think, does he really know classical music, or is he just, as we were, just kind of faking it as he went? And you do learn as you go. It's pretty remarkable, though, isn't it? Learning on the job.
Yeah, I mean, the hands-on experience, there's nothing that compares to it, I don't think,
No, I agree.
And we really did try to operate it as professionally as we could. Even we took it really serious, and Joe, you can attest to this, the whole broadcasting of all the hockey games, home and away. And we made it as if, we looked at it as if this was a money-making operation, like any commercial station would do it this way. We had Joe and Steve, Joe doing the play-by-play and Steve doing the color, and it sounded very professional. And and again, we're just kids, right? And we would set up transportation. If we're doing an away game, we would have to, weeks in advance, order the toll circuits. Those were the phone lines that you would use back then to get the audio from whatever the location was back to the station. And, you'd have to get that locked in and make sure the phone company put a test tone on it and kept it on there and didn't unplug it before we got there and stuff. So there was a lot going on, but it helped you learn. You learned, I learned a lot of management skills. I didn't realize I was learning them at the time, but I did, learn budgeting. It was a lot. It was its own separate education in a way from our regular education in academics.
The Steve Marty referenced a moment ago, by the way, is Steve McDonald, who is the radio play-by-play voice of University of Rhode Island basketball and football to this day, and somebody who himself has carved out a nice career. He is also on morning radio in Portland using the nom de plume Jim Shorts in Providence. I'm sorry, Portland, Providence. You know what I mean.
Jim Shorts, I love it.
Yeah, someplace like that. So, and he's done great, and a lot of people from WDOM then and through to this day have found their ways into careers in communications, and that makes me wonder, with respect to the two of you, did you walk into WDOM with a career in communications in mind, or did the experience at WDOM point you in that direction? What about you, Tory?
Ooh, wow, that's a really good question. I feel like it's a little bit of a mix, and I don't think I really knew. I was an English and French major at Providence, so I just knew that I loved it, and I feel like it was such an interesting thing, because I feel that going into that station, it was just a completely different bubble than the rest of the campus. Do you guys know what I'm saying by that? It was like kind of our private club, and
Right.
it was one that we took seriously. And not to get off track, but I just wanted to kind of insert here that I was always surprised at the number of people who listened. And you in different ways, we'd be out in the community, and I'd hear somebody saying, "Oh, are you on WDOM? I listen all the time." And I had no idea that there would be any listening audience beyond just our dorms. I didn't think that other people would be listening in. And I thought that was the coolest thing, that we had a much larger reach. I don't even know if I knew that term at the time, but I found that to be really, really great. So I don't know if it's kind of a compilation, Joe, to answer your question, if over time I started to learn the power, or the just the kind of impact you could have on other people's lives. I think it might, for me, be a combination.
What about you, Marty?
I would say it was a combination for me too. When I got to school, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do career-wise, but previously I was always interested in Boston area media. Like I remember Channel 4 in Boston had these two newscasters, Jack Williams and Tony Pepper. And I just thought they were great, and Jack Williams was there forever. And
Ever.
then also radio-wise, the big station when I was a kid was WRKO. It was a top 40 music station, and Dale Dorman was the morning guy there for a while, and he was great. And subsequently, I ended up working at the same station as Dale later on, and got to meet him and everything, but that was cool. But so anyway, when I got to school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I started out as a music major. I hadn't been playing instruments long enough, so I became a psychology major with a sub-concentration in music. But when school was all done, I had a choice. I could go on to grad school for psychology or do something else. And I just decided to pursue broadcasting to see where it would go. I did grow to really enjoy it and feel comfortable in it. So, but the DOM experience for me made that transition definitely possible, because when I got out of school, if you wanted to go on, you had to get an internship. So, and it was easy to get offers for internships, having been both a graduate of PC, but also all the experience at DOM. So yeah, it was definitely a combination, I think there's a lot of people that start out one way and then get into broadcasting because you get exposed to it and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool and I can probably do this,
Yeah.
So.
And it's a familiar feeling. You were just mentioning internship. I was able to create an internship, and I have no idea how I did it, my junior year. And do you guys remember Father McBrien?
Sure. He was the dean of the college at that time.
Yeah. So Father McBrien said, well, we've never done this before, but I was able to get a paid internship at a radio station right outside of DC in Virginia, and
Wow.
not far from, where I lived at the time. And I ended up, I went into his office afterward. I had a great time at my internship, and I came in afterward, and he goes, so how did it go? And he had gotten, reviews on me, and he goes, well, girl, I'm going to give you an A. And he was like beaming and just so excited that I was able to kind of have the first internship. I don't know why they didn't allow it, but I guess hopefully they do now while students are junior year.
It probably
definitely.
was that they didn't have a communications department at that time.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, I think that must have been it. But my first job, just like you, Marty, after college, I worked on I actually joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, which is like the Peace Corps in the US. And I was in Montana. And the whole time I was in Montana, I was like, man, they need a radio station out here. And when I got back, my parents were living for about 5 minutes in Portland, Maine. And I went to live with them because I didn't know if I was going to go to grad school. And I answered an ad in the paper for a freelance reporter. And I went into the station, and the guy said to me, Don Huff, you probably know him. One of you,
not
both of
personally,
you guys.
but I know him.
So the dean of news, Don Huff, said, well, I'm glad to see that you're an English major. You know how to write. Let me hear your voice. And he heard my voice, and he said, you've got the job. Do you want it? And I didn't know what I was getting into. But I think part of it is being scrappy enough and being open-minded to like learn new things and to do things that might not actually be in your purview, but you'll work extra hard to make it happen. And I think that's a big part of it.
Being able to be a self-starter, being enthusiastic and energetic, and not needing somebody to tell you what to do all the time. I think that's key for any industry, but particularly I've noticed that for communications and broadcasting.
Yeah, I agree.
In that context, how important do you think it was, in fact still is, to have had that broad-based liberal arts education that PC provides? So in other words, Tory, you were in a position where somebody was able to recognize that you could write and that you could speak and you could make inferences and do the things that one learns from having an education of the type that is offered here at PC?
Extremely important. I think that it's almost like, I don't know why I'm coming up with this comparison, but it's almost like when you play Trivial Pursuit, that you you have kind of this background that you know philosophy, you know religion, you know, I mean, you've got this. I mean, I took a great 19th century European art class at Providence, and that actually has helped me. I can't even tell you how much. So, there are times that I'll be in a position that I'll be able to allude to that. I don't know. It's just, it's really interesting that you can have that kind of a background and have that depth and breadth of knowledge that seems to really work.
And Marty, you referenced that earlier when it comes to the pronunciations, and that's a real factor in your work to be able to do that. And I'm sure that there's a broader meaning to that in your work as well.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that's just one aspect, but when I think about how many different courses I took and what I was exposed to, as Tory said, you just kind of have such a good foundation of things, but you also you become a more critical thinker, you become a better writer, and you become somebody that's not afraid to go and learn something, and for instance, transitioning from radio to voiceover work, they're sort of related, but they really are two different things. And I had to learn a whole new set of skills in order to be able to do that. And it's almost like by being exposed to things, you also realize that there's a lot out there that you can continue to learn. And maybe that's part of the Dominican thing where, their thing, as I see it, is, all learning is good no matter what. Learning for the sake of learning is good. It certainly can't hurt you, and so I just feel that, I mean, if you think of it, even with development of Western civilization, we were exposed to so much. I'll admit I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I certainly
It was a lot of
now,
work.
looking back.
It was a lot of work, right?
Work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to piggyback on what you're saying in a second. Go ahead, Marty.
Oh, yeah, you learn so much. And then in addition to that, I mean, I'm thinking about some of the classes I took. I mean, in addition to the psychology classes and statistics for the psychological testing, there was like, I took economics. I took music classes, like history of jazz. I mean, there was so much different stuff. So you end up with a good understanding of a wide range of things. And I think that I think that's perfect for broadcasting. I mean, frankly, I see some people that didn't get that kind of background, and it's just, it makes you, I think it makes you actually kind of a better person, just more well-rounded.
I think I just wanted to also add on a couple of thoughts. Western Civ, I just, all of a sudden you mention Western Civ and all of these professors' faces flashed before my eyes. And there was a priest there who, he brought a piece of Western Civ so to life that for me, and I think for others who were in my class, and he introduced us to the musical Cats, and he played memory, and he he tied it into, in the most beautiful way, a lesson on Adam and Eve and whether creationism, it was really interesting. But, that kind of makes me feel like I had so many friendships with teachers there, professors who just had their doors wide open and were very interesting people. And I found that to be a very unique. I know a lot of colleges, encourage that, but I really felt like we were able to have these great relationships with the Dominican priests and the Dominican nuns who were there, and Franciscans, and it was just a different kind of I don't know if it was just the time we were there or if it's still very much like that. It was so wonderful to be able to have that kind of a realization that these are people. They're not just priest or nun. They're people, and they have so many interests, and they're just very interesting people. And I loved having that opportunity to get to know them better that way.
This discussion of the nature of the education and the community element of what Providence College has been and still is reminds me of sort of a related characteristic, if you will, and that's flexibility. and adaptability. And in the work that both of you do, this really is striking because, Tory, let's start with journalism. When you started in journalism, it was nothing like it is now. In hardly any way, except for the fundamental idea of telling an accurate story in a way that's compelling. But beyond that, all the mechanisms have changed entirely.
Well, anybody who is in the communications field or hoping to get into it, and who they're students now, they may not know what an Associated Press machine is, or a UPI.
UPI, yeah.
And so what those were, I mean, gosh, they would spit out updates all the time in the newsroom. You would hear them; they'd be spitting out. It was like typing across on this machine, and you'd pull off a strip, and you'd go through it to see what the latest news was. So you might find out about
way before the internet. There was no
way.
internet. There was no websites. You couldn't just get anything right on. There were no personal computers.
No.
When I was at school. So yeah. So
nor
machines
I.
Were,
yeah. We were lucky to have typewriters. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Manual typewriters.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, manual typewriters. And I remember, we had our scripts. We had, I think they were like 5-ply. And Joe and Marty, you both know this. They were like 5 or 6-ply. And then they had in between each of those. I mean, these are thick pieces that you'd have to manually scroll into your typewriter in the newsroom, and you'd have to push really hard so that you could actually make an impression in there. But you were writing your news that way. And if you had to make any changes, God forbid, you'd have to scratch it out and then white it out and write in on top of it, and hopefully you can read it correctly. And then there was a teleprompter that you had to feed your script. You had to tape your scripts exactly in the right way, in the right order. Then you'd have to manually feed them into the teleprompter. And then if you weren't so lucky, you had to kind of drive the teleprompter with your foot or your knee yourself and then read the teleprompter. I mean, it was a full body experience.
Wow. Almost sounds like the Flintstones now that you're thinking it.
Oh my gosh.
After you're done with your broadcast, hop into your car and use your feet to actually through the floorboard to kind of get it to move.
Right.
It's a long time ago.
Exactly. And you'd go to the drive-in for your Brontosaurus burger. Exactly.
And it's evolved all the way to reporters tweeting from the scene of a story, right?
Oh my gosh.
Or whatever it might be is snippets of the story, and it all comes together at the end.
Well, breaking it even before it comes out of somebody's mouth, it seems, right? I mean, boy.
Yeah.
The same must apply to your work, Marty. Of course, technology has changed. You talked, in fact, a little bit about technology back at the beginning of this conversation, but you have a lot you need to keep up with and a lot that you need to be able to adapt to.
Well, it was a big paradigm shift, I think, for those of us that started in the analog world and the pre-internet, pre-personal computer world, where, we would record and produce on reel-to-reel machines, cutting up the tape, splicing the tape. All of the music was on records. Sometimes you would dub all of the music onto carts. Carts were they looked like 8-track tape machines, and put each individual piece of music on there and each commercial on there. And then CDs came along, and then finally, computer systems that were fast enough and had enough storage where an entire library could just be stored on servers, and you could sequence it, so the automation was there. It was a big paradigm shift. I mean, I will say, for me particularly, because I ended up mainly doing production in radio, being able to do it now using Pro Tools or Adobe Audition, whatever, any kind of digital audio workstation, it's a billion times easier and more efficient than what it was back then. And that allows you to be more creative, more flexible. But yeah, you need to be able to learn that stuff too. And in actuality, it's not brain surgery, but you do have to be able to think it through and, be open to learning it and sticking with it. So yeah, it's been a big change. I think it's much better, and just, again, with the internet, being able to connect easily to anybody pretty much wherever you need to, it's really pretty cool.
I want to add it's a lot lighter too.
Oh
One
yeah.
thing I didn't talk about was the old days of television. Oh my word, Joe, you can definitely corroborate this. Cameras, boy, they weighed probably, am I exaggerating when I say 50 pounds?
It might be a little
Cameras?
exaggeration, but they were a good
Okay.
35. And then there was a separate
Oh,
recording deck, which
and you had
also
the
weighed
recording
35 pounds. So, yeah,
and then
right.
you had a tripod, which they were very, very clunky, big, thick. And so that was just the beginning of it. And the tapes, they were much larger than even those VHS tapes. Remember, the
Hmm.
3/4 inch tapes were just enormous. And so you'd have to add those to the weight of the, I mean, it was a real workout to have to carry everything around. And that was just to shoot. And then you'd have to
But
come back.
that's how you guys were able to all stay in such great shape, though.
Exactly,
You
Marty. I'm glad you
you got to
said
work
that.
out. Yeah.
We're going to
You know,
we'll send a copy of this up to Syracuse University where they have a program in broadcasting history and they can play this for their students. How's that sound?
ooh, that sounds great. I think if you could dig up for our conversation there on campus, can you find an old camera, an old tripod, something we could show? It would be show and tell time.
I'd like to say yes, but I'm looking at Chris Judge, our producer, who keeps track of all the equipment, and he's saying no, he got rid of all that stuff a
No
long time ago.
way.
So pretty useless at this point. But
Probably
yeah,
at the Smithsonian now.
that's right.
Good grief.
But this is interesting, and the point of it is really in context that you have both been able to succeed and, in fact, thrive in your careers because I think of two things that are related to each other. The WDOM opportunity, where you had to use a sports term, a lot of reps, lots of opportunities to talk into a live microphone and make mistakes and find out what works and what doesn't, and layer that on top of a good education in a place where people are encouraged to find ways to think about things and to develop solutions to problems and to be creative. And there you go. This is how it all works and how it all comes together. And you are both very good examples of that.
Thank you. I think that doing what we did, it really actually forces you, and it forces you to build your own self-confidence. It really builds it up. And I think that when you learn that actually it's kind of cool to make mistakes, it's kind of funny and it's fun,
Yeah.
and you roll with it and you kind of own it, and it's like it's okay, and everybody who's listening kind of goes along with it and they love it. And I think once you realize that people are going to like you for you, I don't mean to sound like Mr. Rogers, but it's true. I mean, they're going to like you for you, and you don't have to be perfect. It's almost like they don't want you to be perfect.
No, they want you to be a human being.
Hmm.
And I would add to that it's not just for broadcasting that the WDOM experience was good. It could be for almost any other sort of position you wanted to get
Hmm.
into. If you ended up in a if you ended up in a corporation and you were head of a big department or whatever, you still need to be able to communicate in a very clear way and in an honest way to your people in order to get them, on board. Even, I know of a couple of our friends, Patrick Carrington and John Simpson. They both went into advertising, both very creative guys. And I like to think that perhaps some of their creativity was allowed to be expressed when they were at WDOM. They were certainly very interesting, compelling people from a creativity point of view and from a seeing things from a different angle point of view. But just being able to develop those things that can lead you into many different directions, I think.
Another person from that era who might be familiar to many of our listeners, in fact, was a podcast guest last summer, is Sean McAdam, who is doing really well as a sports journalist in the Boston market, has been for a long time, covers Major League Baseball and the Red Sox, and he credits his WDOM experience for positioning him to be able to do the things that he does now. And he's done a lot of broadcast work as a consequence of being a successful print journalist. And let's think, Marty, too, about your two predecessors as general manager of WDOM. So the one right before you was Glenn Hoyle, who was an executive with Barnes & Noble, and in fact is around PC quite a lot now because of Barnes & Noble's connection to the college, through the bookstore here. And the general manager before Glenn, you may remember. Do you remember?
It was Mike McCormick.
Better known as Reverend Michael McCormick, OP. He's a Dominican priest at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. So
I have to tell you a funny story about Mike McCormick.
Of which there are plenty. But yes, go ahead.
So, when I was general manager, I had a question about, it had something to do with something technical about setting up the hockey games. And I contacted Mike, and he was in seminary, and he helped me out, So what I decided to do, I knew that he liked scotch. He liked Dewar's scotch. So I bought a bottle of scotch and I sent it to him at the seminary. So I get a letter from him, and he thanked me for it. He said, and I really appreciate you helping me out with my, quote, spiritual, unquote, life. So I thought that was pretty funny. I didn't know if he was allowed to have scotch there or not. I suppose it was probably okay, but
man,
anyway.
You were rich. You could afford Dewar's. Wow.
I don't know. I know maybe there was probably a liquor store around the corner from the school where it was dirt cheap or something. I don't know.
And remember, Tory, he was managing the budget, so that may be part of the solution to that.
Oh no, that came out of the personal funds.
That's a great story.
And Joe, who was, I can't even remember, who was general manager when I was in 85, 86?
Well, Marty and I were long gone, so you'll have to tell us. I don't remember.
I don't remember.
After me, I believe it was Christine Straminski.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yep.
All right.
And then after that, I don't know who after that.
Okay.
So hopefully they're listening and they can let us know. So
gosh,
let us know.
Woo!
No doubt.
A blank.
No doubt they benefited from the experience greatly too, and I bet they've done very well.
I'm sure they have, Joe, but it's hard to measure up when the two of you have set the bar so high.
Oh boy! So we're, by the way, going to pick this up live this coming weekend, Saturday the 23rd, as part of Alumni and Family Weekend. We're going to have a panel discussion in McPhail's in Slavin Center beginning at 10 a.m. about WDOM and its legacy and impact. And it will involve Tory and Marty, and the third panelist will be John Hennessy. John's a member of the class of 1982, and he has had a long and successful career as a sports play-by-play announcer. He was the voice of New Jersey Devils for many years, including one of the seasons when they won the Stanley Cup. And John's a great character and has lots of good stories to tell, and it'll be great to have him as part of that as well. And the current general manager of WDOM, the student who runs the station now, will join us. So it should be a lot of fun.
That's fantastic.
10 o'clock Saturday morning. Marty, one thing I got to talk to you a little bit about and see what you have for memories is those hockey trips. We did cover the Friars in our senior year, 1982-1983, was one of the best Friar teams ever. They qualified for what was then called the Final Four, lost the national semifinal game in Grand Forks, North Dakota, to the University of Wisconsin. Wisconsin went on to win the national championship, but our classmates, Randy Valashek and Kirk Kleinendorst and Steve Anderson and Mike Bolstad, and the list goes on, Bruce Raboyne, tremendous players.
Peter something.
Utah Pizzini
I was there,
was in
you
there.
guys. I went to that game with you guys.
In North Dakota.
Yeah, I got on the fan bus. I went.
Excellent.
I was there with you guys.
Yes, we were fortunate to be able to broadcast that. But anyway, so we had this great team to follow. And in those days, the Friars played in the ECAC, which involved the current Hockey East teams and the Ivy League teams. So this meant going to Dartmouth and to Princeton and to Clarkson and St. Lawrence and all that kind of thing. Those trips were amazing. You and Steve McDonald and I venturing out to broadcast these games. And first of all, how did you manage to get us permission to do all of this? Do you remember?
Well, I think, my recollection is that Father McGreevy was sort of our main advisor. He was, he was in charge of things, but I think that his view was that here's the school's budget. That's all you're getting. So if we needed more money, I recall we used to fundraise. We would have that guy come and we would do a sale for a week, selling like
luggage or something,
electronics. Luggage, tools, and so we would basically split the proceeds with him. But members of the station would help sell. We'd sell all this stuff down in Slavin Center. And then I recall a couple of times deciding to do some underwriting as well to further fund some of these trips. But they were fine, we were, if you think about it, we were probably pretty harmless. I recall having to, in addition to setting up, the broadcast lines for the away games and making sure that if we were staying somewhere that we had a place to stay, we'd rent these cars. I'd go down. There was a car rental place right behind the Biltmore, and I think it was like an Avis or something. And so I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to rent a car to me, a college student, but they did.
Wow.
And we could only afford the smallest car. So it would be me, Joe, and Steve. And Steve wasn't a little guy in a little Ford Escort and driving it. I remember driving it out to Colgate and I don't know, a couple other places. I didn't go to all those games. I don't think. I think that you and Steve went to them, but I can recall bringing the thing back. And it would be like they must have had to shovel out all of the like fast food wrappers and candy bars. It had to have been disgusting, but it was perfect for us. It was fun.
The stupid things you remember for 35 years. For some reason, we rented a Chevrolet Cavalier to go to Clarkson and St. Lawrence, and we stopped in Vermont or somewhere on the way back to buy gas. And I remember this gentleman coming by and saying, "So, how do you like your Cavalier?" We talked about that all the rest of the way back to Providence. So that was kind of ridiculous stuff. But
oh man,
and those were good teams and lots of good games, and we had the market cornered. So that was good. And I think that was probably good for the station because there was community interest in that team, and there was no professional broadcast until deep into the playoffs when professional station came along and got in the way. But up until that point, I think it was probably good for visibility.
You know what I recall too is that I think the hockey team really appreciated that we put that effort into broadcasting all of those games. And I remember anytime going over to Schneider Arena and Lou Lamoriello being there, he was nothing but nice. He knew who we were and whatever. He was great, and so I think they appreciated that. And I think that it was the right thing to do, to broadcast those games.
And those games were packed.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really, I just remember there really weren't very many open seats there.
It was a great atmosphere for college hockey at that time. For sure. It was a lot of fun, and for good reason, because the teams were good, and Coach Lamoriello did really put together a great program there at that time. So the good old days. Well, we could probably do this for a few more hours, but I think we maybe ought to wrap it up and save a little bit for this coming weekend. I can't thank you both enough for the time today. This has been so much fun, and
thank you, Joe.
We're really looking forward to seeing you this weekend.
Thank you, Joe, so much for having both of us on. This has been a really fun time, and I hope people don't fall asleep as they listen to us regale. Well, we'll be laughing anyway, right?
If we're still awake at our ages, then they're still awake too.
They better be.
So, Tory Ryden, class of 1986, and Marty Moran, class of 1983, our guests today on the Providence College Podcast. Thank you for joining us. You can subscribe to the Providence College Podcast at all the usual places, including Spotify, and they're available on the college's YouTube channel. Feedback is welcome at podcast@providence.edu. Thanks to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Joe Carr. Until next time.